Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of islands in our water now, and it's time to decorate them. So, our water is a little bit, our islands are a little bit boring, and we've got some cool options to decorate them with. Before we get into decorating them, though, we need to actually drop our ship into the water, just so we can have it available for us in the next couple steps. So to do that, what we're going to do is open in our assets pane here in the project panel. We're going to go to our Techability folder and then click on the ship folder. We're going to drag this ship prefab out into the world. And we want to drop it in, make sure we drop it into the water. And what we also want to do is get our camera nice up and close, and using that movement gizmo with the W key, there it is. We're going to grab this y-axis gizmo. And what we're going to do is drag it up just a bit because we just barely want the bottom of that water or our ship to be sitting in the water. And that'll be important later, but for now what's important is making sure we just barely have it in the water there, just like that. That looks good. We don't want it to be too far in like this. We don't want it to be way out in the air. We want it to be just barely sitting on the water. So you see it kind of, if you get close, you should see the water kind of overlap the bottom of the boat. Now what we can do is go back into our Techability folder, click on the Environments folder, and we're going to be moving between three of these four folders here: the Buildings folder, the Dock folder, and the Trees folder. So what we can do is open up the Buildings folder to start, and you can pick any of these 5 buildings. I'm going to pick House 01, and we're going to drag that out onto our island here. And you might notice that when you do that, it looks like this. You got the big shadow, and you can't really see anything on one side of your building, maybe on the other side, but on the one side, it's really hard to see. To fix that, what you can do is click on this object or this button up here, this little light bulb button. That's going to turn off lighting in your scene, and that'll make it a lot easier to see what you're working with. From there, what we're going to do is, again, using that movement gizmo with the W key, we're going to just kind of drag our house around, try to do our best to line it up with the top of the island or wherever on the island we're putting the building. And this is where having flat islands is important. And if you find that none of your islands are suitable for keeping your building looking nice, you can go back to the terrain, use that raise or lower terrain tool, and again, use the shift key, and you can even drop the brush size so you can work on one island in specific. And use that shift key and drop the opacity too. Man, we gotta drop it down pretty far, huh? There we go. Yeah, you can use the shift key and kind of smooth an island. If you do short clicks, it won't drop as far. If you hold the mouse and move it, it'll drop more. But if you do little taps with the mouse button, it won't drop quite as hard. I'm gonna undo all of those with Control Z because my island's as flat as I need it to be. And if the sand goes in a little bit, that's totally fine. Like this type of thing is fine, even if it's a little bit more like that, that's okay. The thing that we're trying to avoid is having our little door jambs here blocked with sand, because we do want our player to be able to walk around inside these. We just don't want them to be blocked by the island itself from getting in. So we'll use the movement gizmo to line it up with where we want it on the island. We can press E to bring up the rotation gizmo if our island's a little bit slanted or tilted. We can use the E key and that rotation gizmo to line it up a little nicer. But those are the two tools we probably only want to use in the buildings because we don't want to mess with the scale at all. Same thing with the docks. We don't want to mess with the scale, but with the docks we can do a pretty cool trick. So I'm going to take a minute to explain this here. So we've got a whole lot of options in our dock folder. And again, that's in the environments folder, docks. I'm going to start with this dock end piece. And I want my dock to go right up to the beach. So I'm going to use the movement gizmo and line it up as close as I can. When you happen to drag your dock out into the world, if for some reason your movement gizmo is way off center, go up to the top here and click on this pivot button. And what that's going to do is move the gizmo to the center of our object. So if we click pivot, you'll see it lines up much nicer, lines up much nicer with our dock and makes it a lot easier to understand when we're moving it around. So we've got this dock piece here. What I want to do next is drag on our next piece. So I want to use one of these dock middle pieces, wherever it happens to be. Here we go, this one will work. And I'm going to line it up as best as I can. The most important thing to line up is the Y value. So we see on our guy here, he's at 18.66. I'm going to make this an even 19 on his transform component. And then on the guy I just added, I'm going to make that one into an even 19 as well. And that's just going to make it so that we know for sure that the tops of our docks are lined up perfectly. Then I want to use the blue or the red gizmo, depending on how you're rotated here, and line it up best as I can from side to side. And I have this little bit of overlapping here, so I'm going to use the red gizmo and pull it just to where they're just barely overlapping just a little bit. That's okay if they're overlapping a little bit. And then once I've got it lined up, if I want to just make, a dock that just goes straight out into the ocean, what I can do is make sure I have it selected, press Control D, and what that's going to do is make this duplicate version of our dock called Dock Middle 1. And with that one selected, we could use our original dock, but we want to select the duplicate. And I'm going to hold the Control key, the left Control key, and I'm going to click the red gizmo here. It might be Command if you're a Mac user. I believe it's Command. But it's either Control or Command. Hold that and click on the red gizmo and drag it to the right. And you'll see instead of moving smoothly like it normally does, it will snap once you move your mouse far enough to the end of that dock. And that's going to make it a whole lot easier for you to make sure that every dock you add is lined up properly. The only trick here is to make sure that when you add a new dock piece, say you want to add some stairs or something to the ocean, just make sure you line up. You remember that Y value, so it's 19. We're going to line it up here at 19. And since this one is kind of turned, we're going to add a 90-degree rotation to our transform gizmo. So that's going to rotate it 90 degrees. So now the stairs are facing to the left. And then you just line it up like we did the first time. So yeah, and there's a whole lot of dock pieces. You can make it look nice. There's these little corner pieces that you can drag out. So you have like this big end to your dock. I'll again do that 19 trick and line it up as best as we can with the edge of this other dock. And I'm even going to make another thing here. And now we've got this guy. And now I've got this nice little dock thing. And again, you can do that as much as you want, make it as crazy as you want. If you want to add little platforming segments by duplicating it and dragging these up, you can even do that if you want. Make a little area for your guy to jump to. It's okay if they're floating above the water. Nobody's gonna deduct points or anything if you've got floating docks. In fact, if you want to make these platforming segments, that's totally cool. Experiment, like make it your own. Make your own mini game out of this stuff if you want. The stuff's here to have fun, not to be the most realistic thing in the world. But the last piece of decoration that we can add to our island is these trees in the trees folder. So in environment trees, you'll see we've got 12 trees or so. You can drag these onto any of the islands to put some trees around. And again, you can use that W key with a movement gizmo. You can press E to rotate it so it lines up a little nicer with your island. And you can also press R. We don't want to do this for our other objects, but for the trees, you can press R, and that will bring up the scale gizmo. And if you click on the white box here, you'll see that it makes our guy bigger or smaller, depending on if we drag to the left, it makes it smaller, and if we drag to the right, it makes it bigger. So I want to make mine a little bit smaller, so I'll drag a little bit to the left, and then I'll move it down until that bottom part is overlapped with sand. That way we know it's actually sticking out of the sand. And we'll add a couple more trees here. Leave that one nice and big. We'll add this guy. He's kind of small by default. He needs to be rotated a little bit. Yeah, and there we go. So now we've got a nice little island decorated here. So again, what I want you guys to do is take your time. Don't decorate every island, because if you're like me, you probably put a bunch of islands in, And while it would be great, and if you want to take your time outside of class to decorate every island, that's awesome. Go ahead. But this does take a little while. We do want you to take your time, make a couple, like 3 or 4, maybe 5 islands look as nice as you want. Make them look nice and pretty. Get as many buildings and the nice big dockyard. Maybe have a cool platforming dock segment. Make this stuff look nice. But we don't want to spend too much time because we do have some more work to get to this week. But take your time on a few islands and make sure it looks nice. Just like with the terrain step, I'm going to go ahead and decorate a couple of my own islands here, and I'm going to just fast forward through it just so you can get a sense for what the process looks like and get some reference for how you might want to decorate some of your own islands. Okay, so I got my sea here to a nice point. I think I got trees on most of my islands, got a few buildings placed around, um, so I think that looks pretty good. One thing that you will likely notice once you do all that is just how many objects are now in our hierarchy view. We've got a whole ton of stuff here, and while that's all good, we do want this much stuff. It's kind of hectic up in our hierarchy view. So what we're going to do is click off of any object. We can actually just click, don't click the arrow, but click this like the name part of our scene here. And what we're going to do is right click, try to find an open space. It really doesn't matter if you end up having to click on an object, but we want to try to click somewhere where we don't have to create a child. But I guess for the sake of this, it's easiest to just click on an object. And what we're going to do is right click on an object and click create empty. And that's going to make a child of any of the objects in our scene that we happen to click. So I click the dock here. So now I've got this empty object. I'm going to drag that out. So important note, if you drag it onto another object where it's got this gray highlight on it, it's going to end up making it a child of the other object, which was not what we want. What we want to do is drag it and try to drop it when we get this blue line here. That blue line means that instead of making it a child of one of these two objects, we're going to drop it right in the middle. So we're going to drop it there, and we're going to rename this to environment. And from there, what we're going to do is actually just grab all of our objects that we just made and make them children of our environment object. That's just to clean up our hierarchy. So there's a couple of ways to do this. We can grab them all individually and drag them onto the environment panel, which is good, but it's a little slow. But if you want to do it this way, that's okay. So we can just drag and drop all of them. But we want to be sure we don't drag everything in our hierarchies. We don't want to drag the terrain, we don't want to drag the water, and we don't want to drag this Techability reference object or this event system object. We don't want to drag any of that stuff in there. So make sure that you skip those 4. And we don't want to drag the ship either. The ship also needs to be skipped, so make that 5. But there should be a pretty good chunk of objects that are all next to each other. The directional light is the other object we don't want in there. So we can actually see from house 01 all the way up to house 012, there's actually no objects that we don't want to be in the environments folder. So what we can do is a little trick where we click the bottom object and we click the top object, but the second time we click, we hold the shift key, and that's going to select all of the objects in between. And a quick way to check that you're not grabbing anything you shouldn't be is to move your scene camera and look around, and this orange or blue highlight will highlight everything that you've got selected. So if you don't have the ship selected, you don't have the terrain selected, and you don't have the water selected, you should be good. But again, there's a couple objects that we won't see highlighted, which is the directional light and the event system and the Techability reference. We really want to make sure that we don't grab those. But once we've got everything safely selected, we can drag and drop all of them with a click and drag onto the environment object here. And then we can just click this drop down arrow, and now we don't have all those things hogging up space in our scene view. If you, for some reason, you don't see any of these 6 objects, the terrain, the water, the Techability reference, the event system, the ship, or the light, if you don't see that in your hierarchy view, if you do that, you probably accidentally grabbed it. And all you need to do is find it in here. Like I'll say I accidentally put water in. All you have to do is find the water object, click it, and if you put your mouse at the top, it'll automatically scroll up. And you drag it and use that blue line again to pull it out of being a child. If we do all that, then we should be good to go, and we won't have to worry about messing up our environments at all.